On Science Goes to the Movies, our guests are generally polite about the scientific errors in pop culture movies. But not today. Today, we've invited two top scientists to go ahead and scream at the screen. Ahead on Science Goes to the Movies. Welcome to Science Goes to the Movies, a look at the stories of science and how they change our culture. I'm Lisa Beth Kovitz. Today, we're going to talk about those moments in a movie that make a scientist want to get up and scream at the screen, "That's not possible." Joining me is the always interesting Mark Siddall of the American Museum of Natural History, and new to the show, Fordham University Professor of Biology, Evon Hekkala. Welcome.
It's great to be here, thanks.
So glad to have you. Let's start with Rampage. Loosely based on the Midway video game series of the same name, Rampage stars Dwayne Johnson as a primatologist who teams up with an albino gorilla named George to stop two other rapidly mutated animals from destroying Chicago.
Oh, you didn't know about the 30-foot wolf?
So Yvonne, what's not to like?
Well, first of all, I always have a hard time with any movie that shows all these scientists are out to take advantage of opportunities to exploit the world, to exploit money, to become rich off of the suffering of other people, and they're always in the hands of the military-industrial complex, or somehow their intent has been co-opted. When in fact, most scientists barely make a living, right. And also we are typically doing our best to try to work to benefit humanity and the other living creatures on the planet.
Well, scientists are always better dressed than any scientist I've ever met, except maybe Chris Mason.
That's true, Chris.
So Mark, what did you hate about this film?
Well, I think it's a little unrealistic. The one field where it's really women that have dominated primatology in terms of professorships and so forth and being leaders in the field, and you got a guy who's the primatologist? Come on, no, but seriously, this is really the latest bugaboo, the latest boogeyman in terms of gene editing being something we're supposed to be scared about. And there's some things to be concerned about, but I'm not sure exactly how you manage to get gills on a crocodile and porcupine quills on a wolf while getting other things in sort of random ways.
But still, Rampage made just under $500 million worldwide, probably because furious mutated animals are kind of fun when they don't really exist. But in real life, are these animals attacking humans, and does this vision of these species behaving this way make it harder for you guys to do your jobs?
Well, so most of my work is in conservation, and I've worked on many mammals that are predators, including leopards, and I also work on crocodiles. And it is really difficult when they're constantly being portrayed as out to attack people, when in fact, most predators, crocodiles and wolves, would actually run away from people if they had the chance. I always tell people, you have a better chance of choking to death on a grape than on being attacked by a crocodile. That's not to say crocodile attacks don't happen, but these movies that portray them as always rampaging after people are really difficult.
I'm concerned. I mean, we've got politicians out there that think it's really cool to be shooting wolves from helicopters. We've got the children of other politicians that are shooting cats in Africa for photo ops. And honestly, that's not really what we need to be showing. We need to be showing that these animals are in danger in the field, in the places that they live. And really, all of us biologists are conservation biologists at heart.
These animals have had their DNA transformed by a CRISPR-based pathogen owned by the gene manipulation company Energyne. Canisters of the pathogen fall to Earth following the destruction of a space station, Athens 1. The gorilla and the gray wolf breathe in the pathogen, and the American crocodile just eats the canister whole. Is that how CRISPR works? Do you breathe it into your lungs? Do you swallow it whole? And honestly, if your digestion can digest metal, how come it didn't digest the pathogen? But
well, sure. There's a lot going on there. The specifics of CRISPR and gene editing and what you can and can't do, I'll let Evon talk to that. But in terms of using a virus for introducing gene editing, that's something that we're actually doing. That's fairly realistic. There are a couple of things like beta thalassemia and leukodystrophy where there are phase 2 trials going on right now using viruses that are basically kind of like HIV retroviruses. They've been modified so they won't make you sick, but those are targeting those viruses with gene editing software, if you will, built in to allow them to make changes to somebody's stem cells. Now, they're going to be targeted to specific genes in specific cells, and the viruses have to have specific receptors to do that. It's not something that's going to randomly change all of the DNA in all of the cells of your body, and even if it did, that probably wouldn't have an effect.
Why the virus? What is it about a virus that keeps the DNA change?
Well, it's the virus is a way to get the DNA changing editing mechanism inside of a cell. So if you just gave the enzyme, for example, like you said, if you gave an enzyme in DNA to somebody and they ate it, then it would just get digested. Now, there are certain viruses that we know will make it through our gastrointestinal tract if that's where you want it to go. Enteroviruses that people manage to pick up when they're on cruise ships is a good example, or things that you can breathe in, like rhinoviruses, or things that can be injected or acquired sexually, venereally, like HIV. So there are different mechanisms for getting cells into a body, but only certain viruses can get into certain cells certain ways. So viruses are good at that. Got it.
And you were going to...
Well, the big problem with the way they've CRISPR'd these animals, as we sometimes say, they've made this concoction of all these other organisms, and somehow that concoction has transformed all of the cells in these animals simultaneously. And in fact, the way CRISPR works is it's sort of like a find replace on your Microsoft Word document, where you're taking a little piece and you're changing a particular cell, and those particular type of cell, whatever tissue it is, those can proliferate in that particular tissue. Or if you CRISPR'd something into a germ cell, so a sperm cell or an egg cell, that could actually transform a developing embryo so that it had those features. But to transform all the extant cells in a living organism simultaneously, there's no way that could happen.
But I love that CRISPR has become a verb.
True, yeah.
In Rampage, the malevolent company Energyne created this pathogen to rewrite genes on a massive scale to be used as a biological weapon, kind of like a bad mashup of CRISPR and the effects of the atomic bomb. Can CRISPR rewrite genes on a massive scale? Can CRISPR be weaponized? Can CRISPR turn my dog into a wolf with porcupine claws?
We can introduce it into an individual cell that can proliferate that particular kind of tissue, or we can introduce it into a germline cell that can then develop from an embryo into an adult. And so these animals that are fully developed already, that's not possible. I mean, they may develop a tumor, or they may develop a functioning subset of tissue in their body, but the whole animal isn't going to develop all these phenotypic characters that we see in the film.
Does Rampage have the stupidest fictional biological weapon ever? No. There are worse. I happen to know that our guest, Mark Siddall, shouted loudly at the screen when he watched the movie Prometheus. If you haven't seen it, Prometheus is a kind of quest to understand why God would design us to reproduce by having parasites burst out of our chests movie. Mark, living creatures in Prometheus and in Covenant grow really fast without ever eating.
I don't know how that happens. It's like writers in Hollywood and directors have dispensed with the laws of physics that matter can be neither created nor destroyed. And Elizabeth Shaw, who gets a 12-pound, like she's 3 months pregnant, 12-pound four-armed squid gestating inside of her, and she hasn't eaten since they landed on the planet. I don't know how that happens without her eating half of her crewmates, which is probably a different movie in the franchise.
In the movie, the scientists conclude that the engineers created the human race when the computer runs a quick human-engineer comparison program and says,
"Processing. DNA. Match."
There's a lot wrong with that scene. Sure, so you and I are a pretty good match to each other, and Evon and I are a good match to each other. We're probably within 0.5% different on the nucleotides, the individual A, C's, G's, and T's, the letters that make our genetic code. But we're a really good match to chimpanzees too. So about 95% with chimpanzees and gorillas as well. And
Hey, don't forget George.
And George, we're a good match to George, quite frankly. So if we're a good match to the engineers, all it says is what? That the engineers and we share a recent common ancestor that we also share with chimps and gorillas. But there's so much else going on in that scene. 40 chromosomes. They're comparing 40 chromosomes. You've got 24 pairs of identical chromosomes. I've got 23 pairs of identical chromosomes, and then an X and a Y. Not exactly the same. You don't come up with 40 when you multiply by 2 on any of those numbers. It's just bizarre the way that they're 40, maybe it was a ferret, because ferrets have 40 chromosomes. So then I guess the engineers are like ferrets, or a mango.
People forget about plants having chromosomes.
So the engineers are
Mangoes.
are as likely or as likely to have been created by the engineers as we are to have been created by mangoes.
Well, I think if you look at the beginning of the movie, the implication is that the engineers came to Earth when there was no life, and then the guy drinks the black goo, and his DNA gets all shredded up and put in the water, and that generates all of life, and then somehow you end up with a human at both ends. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, that would be a lot of convergent evolution, actually.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I just object to it being creationist, quite frankly.
Well, let me ask you, let's attack this idea of exogenesis, that these terrestrials must be our creators, but then, okay, so
Who created them?
Infinite regress. Right.
It's a bootstrapping problem. You just keep going back and back and back.
Doesn't answer anything. And so Wayland at the end, he kind of gets it right? He says, it was nothing.
Except a couple of hours lost.
A couple of hours lost, exactly.
Do you want to weigh in?
The reason I hate this movie so much, and I hated it because I went into it in the initial introductions, you think that there is a real biological story happening. You think there's actually some good pseudoscience happening, but in the end, it's just sort of a biblical creation story wrapped in a blanket of science.
That could have been really cool, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like Lost. If only they don't have the same writer, do they?
As a matter of fact, in Prometheus, writer Damon Lindelof stuffs a ton of scientific jargon into a religious story of intelligent design. And at one point, a character declares the discovery of the engineers will, quote, discount 3 centuries of Darwinism.
I think our audiences are actually starved for intelligent scientific movies, movies that are based in real science. And this just takes all of this evolutionary biology and historical anthropology, and it suddenly turns it on its head and says, oh no, it's all about creationism.
These errors may sound unimportant, but these movies make science seem illogical. They make the facts seem fake. And a lot of times, they make the scientists seem like real jerks. Mark, I'm going to push your buttons and ask you about the geologist who says that he's there to make money. Yeah, is making a lot of money the reason most people go into geology?
Or any science for that matter, right? I mean, think about it. You're going to do what? Spend 4 years in accumulating undergraduate debt, and then another 6 years to 8 years maybe getting your PhD, to only have to do 3 to 6 more years as a postdoc making 40 grand a year for a 1 in 100 chance at landing a faculty job where you're not going to
nothing.
Yeah, you're not going to make 6 figures until you're approaching your 50th birthday or later. No.
If ever.
The way to make money...
If you get that job.
If you get the job, and if you get tenure, and if you get a grant. I mean, the odds are so slim.
If you don't leave the leaky pipeline.
Right.
Right. The way to make money as a scientist with an undergraduate degree in science or even a graduate degree in science is to go and work in a hedge fund or a financial services firm as an analyst. They'll pay you a lot more, and you'll have a lot more job security.
But you will have taken your training in logic and not illogic to that firm, and it is the logic that makes science special.
Right.
Which these movies are all just sweeping under the rug. And let's talk about being intellectually superior in terms of the character Rafe Milburn.
Oh, the biologist.
Yes, is he the biologist in Prometheus? Is he a moron?
Sure. I mean, what? So the very first live thing that they see on the planet is this snake-like thing that raises its ugly head and throws out this like a frilled lizard threat display, right? Or looks like a really scared cobra. And what does he do? He coos at it and goes, oh, come here, let me hug you. And then it goes and it jumps down his throat. Of course it jumped down his throat. Of course it bit him. That's not what any biologist would do.
It's the Darwin Awards, right? That's the perfect scene for the Darwin Awards.
Do you ever want to hug your crocodiles?
Actually, an interesting fact about crocodiles, most people don't realize because they only touch like crocodile bags or crocodile jackets, is that crocodile's skin is really soft. So sometimes when we actually have them, when we're working with them, I kind of do like to touch them because they're so soft.
Well, Madagascar 2002, when we went there together and you're supposed to have a croc pole to hold the croc down, but the airline lost the croc pole. And so Yvonne and I were jumping on the backs of these crocodiles to hold them down so that she could draw blood from their tails.
Yeah, and the thing is they look so armored, they look invincible, but they're soft. Their skin is very soft, it's very sensitive. They have receptors all over so they can sense things in the
We're
water.
starting to sound like the guy from
And-
Prometheus. We should probably not say you should hug crocodiles.
Oh,
No,
sorry.
don't hug crocodiles.
But it's interesting that I had a full concept that they had skin like
Cold, hard, right?
impenetrable dragon.
Right. No, and actually, they constantly portray crocodilians as things you can shoot at, hundreds of times, and the animal will never be injured, and they're somehow invincible. And yet, we almost lost all of the crocodilians in the 1970s. They were all critically endangered, and we've only recovered all these species because of the Endangered Species Act and the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species. So, showing people these things as monsters is not really beneficial for them.
Right. Do you guys have strength to talk about Jurassic World?
Sure. Bring it on. What do you want to know?
Okay, what do you hate about Jurassic World?
Well, let's see, that they can't spell Tyrannosaurus or Stegosaurus correctly on the DNA files, DNA that they apparently got from a non-blood feeding male mosquito from a species of mosquito that only feeds on plant sap. I could go on if you like.
What I found most offensive about Jurassic World was the misogyny. And for me, the most unbelievable moment was when Bryce Dallas Howard went running in high heels over uneven terrain. Howard's character, Claire Dearing, is an anti-feminist, anti-working woman trope who needs to be scared by dinosaurs back into a 1950s style submissive role.
It's so disappointing after the initial Jurassic Park that had the Laura Dern character that was actually dressed appropriately for a field paleontologist, and she was intelligent, and she took charge, and she got down in the muck, and she dealt with the dinosaurs. And then we have this person in this later film that is as you said, she's sort of this 1950s characterization, and she needs to find her maternal instinct somehow during the course of the movie that she might even be learning from the dinosaur. So that's really problematic, but an even worse caricature of a paleontologist and a female scientist is the character of Bridget Fonda in Lake Placid. Don't even get me started.
Get her started.
Well, so here's this woman who is supposedly a paleontologist in this film Lake Placid, and she's being called to come up and look at a tooth from what may or may not be some prehistoric reptile. And A, she's not interested in going. She doesn't want to go. B, she's wearing sort of debutante-style bun and has a terror of going camping and being in the woods or in the forest. Clearly, the people who put this movie together didn't consult with a real paleontologist, because I've never met a paleontologist who wouldn't dive at the first chance to go looking at reptilian teeth and get in the mud and muck and
Right.
and
Camping is us.
Yes,
I mean,
yeah,
that's what the
absolutely.
job is in many ways.
yeah.
You guys jumped on a crocodile together? Is that what you were telling me?
Yeah, it wasn't the first choice. It was necessary. and that's kind of what we're getting at, that Yvonne's getting at, is that you do what's necessary to get the job done and you actually like doing it. Afterwards, there's a different smell to your sweat.
No, he made me collect leeches for him, and I made him help me collect crocodiles, and I actually think I got the worst end of the deal because I had to not wear insect repellent in a malaria zone to collect the leeches. He just had to jump on a crocodile.
When she got bit by leeches, I didn't get bit by crocodiles. I figured, yeah, she's right. I got off better.
You got off better, for sure, for sure. Please tell me, at least in Lake Placid, that they got the crocodiles right.
So many problems with the crocodiles there. First of all, it's Maine, right? Crocodiles aren't going to survive in Maine, certainly not to any large size. They need to bask to get warm, to be able to digest their food. In fact, this crocodile that's running around, chomping on everything, it would actually be trying to gather some heat by resting on the sides of the lake so they'd be able to see it, first of all,
right.
because it would need heat to be able to digest its food. Secondly, one thing about crocodiles is they typically don't just bite things in half. So the opening scene is, this guy's being bitten in half by this crocodile in the middle of the water. Crocodiles like to dash the food under a rock so it rots a little bit so they can twist pieces off, because they actually can't chew. They can only chomp. So they have a very strong bite force, but they can't chew.
But movies love that. Yeah. Movies love that croc's biting things in half.
I know.
The movie, the croc leaps out and eats a bear.
Yes, it
Not
does.
Not possible.
By the way, it was really good models in there. No, they do drag things from the shoreline, and that's an important aspect of the movie, is that some of the attacks are taking place in the deep water. Typically, crocodile attacks take place on the shore. Most of them actually take place when people are going down to urinate or defecate by the shore, sometimes when they're bathing. But they're really, they like to sneak up on things. So if someone sees them, they're typically reluctant to attack. So there's a scene where the Oliver Platt character is out there in the water making googly eyes with the crocodile. Crocodile behavior is that they don't want you to see them first. If you see them, they're really reluctant to expose themselves.
Shy.
What they really did with the crocodile in this movie was they made a hippo. So hippos will bite you in half in the water. Hippos will look at you in the water and attack you in the water. You're much more likely to be bitten by a hippo than by a crocodile in Africa, not Maine.
But this is an interesting point, because it does seem like movie writers tend to take something like a hippo and cross it with a crocodile, or as we were talking about in Rampage, they took the atom bomb and crossed it with CRISPR. So they take ideas and just marry them.
Yeah.
But these things don't really interact with each other.
Well, I mean, no. They should ask a scientist or two, right?
They should ask a scientist or six.
We're right here.
Yeah. Betty White is the cutest thing in this movie.
She's far and away the best part of Lake Placid, and she gets it right. She understands that if you habituate crocodiles, little hatchlings or young crocodiles, to human feeding, they get used to it and they'll come back time and time again. Actually, there are crocodiles right now, believe it or not, that are being clicker trained, just like your pet dog. So it's very interesting. But Betty White is engaged in this mutualistic behavior with these crocodiles. And on the one hand, it's charming and it shows us that crocodiles can be habituated that way. But the downside is, in fact, when there are problem crocodiles, it's often because there's been some inadvertent behavior where people are feeding the crocodiles. Either crocodiles are getting their chickens or their dogs, or something has happened to the food chain, and so crocodiles start attacking, or people are encroaching on the crocodile territory. So Betty White gets it right in that, yes, you can actually habituate crocodiles and have them come back for more.
But when you say habituate, what you mean, I think, is that she has taught the crocodiles that humans equal food.
Yes, where there are people, there's food, and that can be a real problem.
Especially when she fed her husband to the croc.
Oh, that was an accident.
Well,
So she says.
She also shows that you can get by after 70 as a single woman.
All of this is actually really fun, but question for both. Is it dangerous if the general public relies too heavily on these entertainment tropes for the understanding of science and science possibilities?
Well, I think it's often sending the wrong message about what our motivations are. Our motivations are really discovery. They're not really to go out there and create things for the military. I don't think the military really wants soldiers to be running around full of uncontrollable rage and testosterone. They really want soldiers to be engaging with communities. So even that idea that they're going to come to scientists like us to help genetically engineer super soldiers is crazy.
Right.
I'll actually put in a plug for these kinds of movies in some sense, because I use them. I teach ecology, I teach conservation, and I use them a lot with my students to go through the films and troubleshoot the problems and come up with, like, well, what would have really happened? So we've done everything from Finding Nemo to
Finding Nemo's wrong? What?
Day After Tomorrow. These are all great teaching tools.
How hard would it have taken Prometheus and then Covenant that came afterwards, and actually make it an evolution story instead of making it a creation story? It didn't have to go that way, and you could have done some really cool things with it in order to get a sense about how mutation works and how you can't get variation that doesn't exist and that kind of thing.
Well, that's an interesting point about mutation, because some of these other movies, like the X-Men movies, you know, these characters mutate to have extraordinary powers, frivolous powers. You know, they can set things on fire with their eyeballs, or automatically freeze something or any liquid. Does evolution work like that, or is it really about survival, about a basic?
I think what people really misunderstand sometimes is that evolution doesn't move towards some goal that's waiting for it. What happens is you get variation within a population, and if something changes, like it gets warmer, it gets colder, or there's a different kind of food, those that can exploit the change outperform the ones that can't, and you get a shift in what the population looks like or behaves like. It doesn't create the change. The new environment or the new challenge doesn't create mutations.
And the other big misconception there is that individuals aren't changing. It's the population that's changing. So in all these movies, you know, George gets giant, or Lizzie, the crocodile, I guess, in Rampage, gets giant and gets spikes and spines, and the wolf gets wings, and people misinterpret that they could pass on those traits themselves, and that would be what's called Lamarckian evolution. So the fact is that the population has to change toward the trait due to some selective force or some other environmental change that makes that valuable to have that trait. But
the flying porcupine wolf isn't going to make more flying porcupine wolves unless there's a second flying porcupine wolf to make more flying porcupine wolves with.
Right.
Right.
And I'm not getting laser eyes anytime soon. Thank you guys, this has been so great.
Thanks for having us.
it's fun to hate movies with you.
Listen, we enjoy action movies as much as anybody else. It doesn't have to get the science wrong.